Okay, I'm just testing the audio as well. Can you still hear me there, guys? Is it okay, sound-wise, please? Thanks, Gareth. And I see your question about the 503 on Moodle. Yeah, I started getting that around 8 o'clock this morning and reported it, and it took me, I don't know, it took me about an hour and a half to just to set the release and the restrictions on the various lessons. And after doing all that, they turned Moodle off. So hopefully it'll be fixed overnight and you'll be able to get it tomorrow. What I'll do is I'll upload all the stuff to YouTube, and if you're subscribed, you'll get them. But if it's not back, I'll post the links into Teams for you. So hopefully that will work out okay. Okay, so we're here. We've a few people in, not as many as probably we'd like to have here, but we get cracking. Thanks to those of you who've turned up, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture. So let's see what we're doing today. Okay, so yeah, it's JavaScript. So now we've got to week 3, and we're in the final topic of the first section. So that's pretty good going. So there are 4 sections, and this is all the basic stuff. So we're going to have an overview today of interacting with content using client-side JavaScript. Now, this is a fairly high-level overview. You will need to look at some of the resources that I give you to be able to get the detail yourself. I can help with that. And again, as before, like from the previous 2 weeks, I have these 5 lessons that will introduce you to some aspects of JavaScript, and working through those will really flesh out your knowledge and practice, of course. So JavaScript can be as complex as you want it to be, and I'm going to give you that fairly complex overview. I don't expect you to get it all now, but it's a sense of giving you a flavor of what's possible and what's doable with JavaScript. And then you can come back to the lecture time and time again, because it's something that we'll be working with extensively over the next couple of weeks. So there are 2 flavors to JavaScript. We're going to look at the client-side version. There's also a server-side version. Now, if I was given this, and I was given this course maybe 5 years ago, we didn't really work at all with any of the client-side JavaScript. That's Node.js. It was in its infancy, really, and we worked all our backend or server-side processing with PHP. I'm a Perl programmer natively. I mean, I was programming in Perl, decades ago, and it's my favorite backend language, but it's been overtaken a lot by the Python people, and you'll see some Ruby programmers as well. Of course, lots of Java. I did a lot of backend Java stuff with servlets and the like, and that's still popular, of course, as well. But we're just going to focus exclusively now on the client-side JavaScript. So what is it then? It's a programming language that's used to manipulate documents encoded in HTML on the client side, and for server programming using Node.js on the back side. So for now, we're just going to focus on the client side. JavaScript is very different to HTML and CSS. So, HTML is this markup language. It's about describing content, and CSS was about describing how we present content. But JavaScript is a fully blown programming language, and it shares a lot of commonality in terms of the syntax with the other programming languages you may know, like Java and Python, C, C++, C#. And JavaScript can be placed in the body in line in your HTML documents, or in the head section as a way of preloading the JavaScript within a HTML page. And then you can also load your JavaScript from an external file. And this is how a lot of the functionality happens with all those fancy websites you go to. They have APIs and they have libraries that are loaded as you move from page to page. So JavaScript's client-side power really comes from its ability to manipulate the document object model. Okay, and that's the DOM, and I think we've talked a little bit about that before. And it's also used to manipulate the browser object model, which is the BOM. Okay, so in other words, you can interact with the browser software itself, the window, all that kind of stuff, and you can interact with the page that's currently loaded into that particular window. Okay, This is an interlude. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about JavaScript. So some of you will have come across it already. And I guess I have a little quiz for you. I hope it works. So let's see if we can have this quiz. So I guess the question really is, how important do you think that JavaScript is as a core development language? Not just a web development language, but a core development language. Let me open that for you for voting. It's, you can go to Mentimeter as before, and you can maybe have a look at this. Okay, I can look at some of the comments. Tig says, yeah, it was nearly Scheme. No, it's fine. JavaScript it's had an interesting lifetime, okay, and it's evolved considerably since its inception. Okay, so I'm seeing some comments here. People have found how to make the quiz, and this is really just to get you remembered. There'll be another quiz a little bit later where I'll test you on a little bit of JavaScript, so you can think a little bit about this question. Okay, so you can go to Mentimeter or menti.com, type in 58 42 37 8, and answer the questions. Okay, so yep, there's a thread. You can think about that threaded. We could do threaded programming and yeah, interrupt handling, event handling, all that kind of stuff as well with JavaScript. A little bit of that as well. Okay, so for me, it's good to see that there are some people who are not sure about JavaScript, and that's okay. And the whole purpose of today is to bring you up to speed and tell you a little bit about it. So I guess people are thinking that it's important and fairly important, as you can see from the display, and it is important. It's really important. Language as it goes for core development, not just for some of the web stuff. Okay, it's nice to see that people think it's not too important and some think it's kind of important, but yeah, it is fairly important, and it's going to be important for you as well. So let me go back to the slide. Let me go back to close this voting now, and let's have a look again then at slides. Okay, the reason I mentioned Kitten Academy is because because I tend to use some of those kitten images from this site. So it's just a link and a shout out to this particular site to let you know that and to acknowledge that I've used those in my video. Okay, but what's more important, I guess, is I want to show you the Stack Overflow Developer Survey. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's a really useful survey, and it gives you a sense of what's happening in the world of software development. And I bring it to people's attention every year. We haven't time to go through it in detail. We may come back to it again, but it's a good idea to look at maybe the technology here section, click on the technology, and have a look at the most popular technologies that are currently in place. So we're looking at programming languages, markup languages, and if we could have a look and see how important JavaScript is in terms of modern development. We can see that there are other languages. Python's up there, Java's there, C# is there, PHP, TypeScript is a very popular language. I like TypeScript, but we're working too well with it. My favorite programming language down here in Perl, it's at only 3.1%, but that's okay. When we look at web frameworks, we can look at jQuery and React and Angular, and all of these frameworks are essentially jQuery as well. So they're all JavaScript. Okay, so it's good. If we understand JavaScript, we can use these. Other frameworks, Node.js is a backend development environment. I use both .NET and Node.js. So yeah, really popular as well and very good. And we'll be looking at MySQL. We'll also be looking at MongoDB a little bit later. So we're up there with learning those technologies. I mean, if you don't know MySQL, you can know PostgreSQL and Microsoft Server 2. And the various platforms, of course, Linux is up there. It's really important. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much more of that, but it's definitely worthwhile having a look and seeing about those technologies. Okay, so JavaScript is really important. Okay, so sometimes, however, students do tend to worry a little bit about whether they should know every aspect of JavaScript. And in fairness, it's not. It's not easy to get to know everything. Okay, and you have some concerns, I guess, that you don't have as much time to spend in JavaScript as you did with Java. But the point is that you don't need to know everything. You just need to know enough to be able to get it to work and get a sense of how it all works. You do bring an awful lot of programming knowledge to the course already, and you know how to program, and that's really, really important already. So even the diploma students who've only a few months of programming, they're very skilled already, and you know how to program in a language. You understand what's involved in programming, and really all you need to know is, well, how do I do that with this language? Okay, so you have to understand that learning something new is about bringing what you already know about coding, for example, into this web environment. There's some really nice introductory articles. If you click the JavaScript basics from the Mozilla Foundation, it's brilliant. It's amazing. And of course, you can also use the learned JavaScript articles from W3 schools. So it's really worthwhile having a look at those and working through them. And that'll give you some of the detail. I just see some, yeah, Kitten's always amused. I'm just checking the chat here. Perl, yeah, average paint splatter is a valid program. Yeah, I remember doing lots of Perl. In the world obfuscation contest, you won't get that with other computer science programming languages, and I did some competitions for that, and yeah, all sorts of fun Perl. The idea is to make the program as more difficult as possible, rather than modern software engineers who are supposed to make it as easy to read as possible. But it's not my way when it comes to Perl. We can talk about that again. I guess the best way then for you, I would recommend, to learn this new or second programming language is to build on the knowledge that you already know. So think about the program elements, how you understand their working, and look at how you might go about implementing these in some new language. So you usually have constants and scalars. Those are the variables. So in some languages, they have formal types when they can be accessed. They have restrictions on how they can be changed, or how you might be able to use them in expressions. So these are the kind of features you'd have for all languages. So you can have statements that have very specific functionality, like assignments and expression operators. So in JavaScript, you will see these triple operators. So this will be equals, and this is not equals. And you may previously have seen equal equal and not equal, or thing equal as well. So there are whole bunches of them. You'll notice that we have iteration with the for loops, and you know those already, and we've conditionals using if then else. Let's have a quick look at the that equal to sign. Kind of an interesting one. Yeah, so let's have a look at this piece of code here. Okay, so here I have a statement. So I'm declaring this variable a. I'm assigning the value of 1. It's a string 1. Okay, it's not the actual 1 as such. And I guess it's string 1, yet I'm doing an alert which makes this comparison. So here's this equality test here to test this string against this. That's okay. Then I'm just also doing this check to see, is a equal to 1. So you want to think a little bit for yourself. I haven't got a quiz set up with this, but what do you think the alerts will give us? Will they give us true, false, true, 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 whatever? So any idea what the first alert will give us? And any idea what the second alert will give us? Trues or falses? Okay, I see Tyga's responded already. Okay, so when you say it compares strictly, it's about types. Okay, so it's really, that's correct, of course. Yeah, so it's about checking the types, not just the values. So equal equal will just check the values, and there will be all sorts of casting happening here, and then the other thing will test the actual types as well as the actual values. Okay, so let's just run it and see what happens. Here's run. So we get true and we get false. Okay, so a is not equal to 1 because this value here of 1 is a number, an integer, and this number value of 1 here was a string value. Okay, okay. So it's an interesting thing to look at. So you know, there's lots of things that you can have a look at and see how it might work with your JavaScript. So you know, even the basics can help you. And it can help you to look and return to those and check those out. There'll be small differences from languages you know already. Okay, so if you know how to use all of these already, then you can translate what you know and use this in CS. So for example, you might have imperative languages like C and Java and JavaScript. They're not dissimilar. The statements have more in common than you might think. So imperative languages are where programmers describe step by step the order of what the computer actually needs to do. SQL, CSS, and HTML are all declarative languages, and are where the programmer describes what the computer needs to accomplish. And there are other ways to describe programming languages: functional, procedural, object-oriented, scripting, etc. So you don't have to worry too much about all of these in this particular module. But you know, what's important to know is that if you have a style, you can usually programming this way in CS. And there's some wonderful, wonderful articles on functional programming with JS that I really, really enjoy. You can do your object-oriented programming and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so yes, term in X your question and things, that's correct. The equal doesn't actually check the types, it just checks the values. So as Tig mentioned earlier in his chat there, it's much more strict in terms of its checking for truth, if you like. Okay. Anyway, so point of the module, whatever you know, you can bring it to your JavaScript and make the JavaScript work for you. So a lot of the time when we ask you to do assignments and so forth, I'm not trying to ensure that you do it in a particular way. I'm just ensuring that you fulfill the requirements and get the job done. So you can use whatever approaches you like. Okay, so if you want to use JavaScript in your HTML documents, then you have to insert the code. So you need to actually have code that says it's between a script and /script tags, just like you have other tags that you've used already in your HTML. So here's, for example, a very simple script section, and this is using the document object model, the DOM. So we're looking for elements by ID called demo, and we're taking out the inner HTML and setting that value to hello world. And you can reference the JavaScript in some external file if you want. So you could have this kind of JavaScript here in this file called myjslibrary.js, and you can load it and it will be executed as soon as it's loaded. Okay, so JavaScript's power becomes really, really obvious when we use it to manipulate page elements, like it's happening here. So we can identify elements and then we can manipulate those elements. So we're dynamically changing the element's contents. For in this example here, the element was called demo. Could have been a div, for example, and we can change the contents of to be hello world. It could be a div or a p element, and we could have actually added some HTML in here as well as part of the string if we wanted. Okay, so it's very powerful, really powerful and useful to be able to do this. So a key feature of JavaScript, let me just get a copy. A key feature of JavaScript is that is this function, and to be able to have functions in JavaScript. And we need these in order to be able to reuse our code. You know, I don't need to tell you why we need functions, but it's good to have them. They're essentially blocks of code that are designed to form some particular task. So a JavaScript function is executed when something invokes or calls it. Okay, so they're like Java's methods. Okay, JavaScript allows function overriding, and you can simulate overloading. It's not natively supported, just as you could do with your Java. And I guess what's really interesting as well here is that sometimes you can think of Java, if you want to go back to your Java, and I know you've all done some Java at this stage, you know, you can have class functions, which are, you know, static functions. Essentially, most of the JavaScript stuff is like static function, and they're not like the methods that would be attached to an object that you create. So anyway, so we can look at it this way. So let's, for example, we could have a look at one called function, and we give it a name, and then we can have a parameter list, parameter 1, parameter 2, parameter 3, and then we have the code that's executed, and we can access those parameters inside. Now, what's interesting, I suppose, that's different from when you would be working with Java or some other languages, you know, you're not specifying any type here, you know, so just working from there. So for example, we could have a function called myFunction that has two parameters, P1 and P2, and we can return the product of P1 by P2. That's fairly straightforward. And if we had that function here, myFunction 1223, then we can call these and return them. We can have a look at this. Let me have a look at the chat there and see. Katerina, can you have a JavaScript external file and have it inside the HTML file too at the same time? Yeah, you can have HTML inside, sorry, you can have JavaScript in the HTML. You can have it in the head section. You can also have it in as inline code in the body section. And you can have this external file that you can load anywhere as well in each section. So yeah, good question. So, you know, you're not exclusively expected to do it one way or the other. You can merge a lot of these things together. Okay, so good question. Let's have a look at these. Maybe let's go back to JS Fiddle and have a peek with these. So I'll look at this one here, show you, and let's go to JS here. And we have a function here, so we're including it in here. And this, let's create this a little bit here. We'll just alert X. And we'll and maybe make that one Y. And real alert. Happens. Okay, we get 276, which is the product, and 1676, which was the product here, the second one. Okay, so it's easy enough to do this. It's fine, and I just put it into this document. So it's fine, and we could create a file, put this into the file, and it will be fine. We could load it. We can create an HTML document, and it will work. I'm just using JSFiddle because it's easy and quick. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. So the brackets operator is really interesting because sometimes people forget about what's actually happening and when things happen. Okay, and Dara, just to answer your question, alert is a built-in browser object model function that allows us to be able to display something as a little dialog or alert. I can go back there and show you. Okay, so this function alert here, when I run the JavaScript file here, run, click to run, it executes the code and then it generates this alert. Okay, and you may have seen these when you're on websites and they ask you to confirm you want to do a payment or something like this. So that's really what's happening here. Okay, so we can close that one and we have a second alert. Okay, good. If you need to ask or know anything, don't be afraid to just shout in chat, and I'll get to it at some point. Okay, okay, good questions. Okay, so what's happening is this brackets operator, and people forget this when they're moving from one language to JavaScript and back and forth. So in JavaScript, you can have x, for example, is assigned the value of my function 1223, but you could also say x is assigned the value of my function. So that's really interesting. You're welcome, Dara. So that's really interesting. So we can go back to our exercise and say, well, is there a difference there? So what I can do here is I can say, what was the example I actually did? X is my function. Okay, so I can put z as assigned the value of my function. Okay, so I've generated this. And I can alert Z to see what's actually there. Okay, so that's kind of interesting to see what's happening here. And it's we can run this again, of course. We get what we expect already, and then we get this. So actually, it returns the function itself. So it's really interesting. So essentially, you are passing the function around. So we've created this variable, which is essentially the function. So how do we actually execute it then? Well, what happens if we do this? We get not a number. Okay, so what happened there? Okay, so that's really interesting. So we can do z 2, 2, and we can run this again. Those, and we get 4. So this is really nice. So what we've done is we've created a value, a variable, which essentially is the function, and then we can execute that function using these roundy brackets, and then take the product of 2 and 2 and display that. So the function is actually the function is returned as an integer here because we're returning as an integer by default. And what happens, Chris, it's a good question, is that we can then cast it afterwards. Okay, we could cast these things to strings as well if we wanted. There's all sorts of fun things we can do, but we won't get there just yet. Okay, so what's important to realize is that the roundy brackets that we have here, the parentheses that come at the end of a function, they're actually responsible for the execution of the function. Okay, so the execution happens at that point. So it's and Jonathan, we could declare it if we wanted as let const or var. They have different contexts depending on the meaning. Yeah, there's lots of ways of doing this, but you don't have to do that if you're just not too worried about scope. Okay, and for now, I'm not too worried about scope. So really, these kind of differences are really important when it comes to becoming proficient in JavaScript. I mean, you could do something like Jonathan mentioned there. You could actually go back to the exercise, or sorry, to the examples, and you could say we could have say let z here if we wanted to see what happens. Okay, and run this. Okay, so do that. Let's comment out this. We can see what happens. You know, we could do var, we could do const, you can do all of these things and check and play. Okay, so you can look at these. So a lot of it depends on scope and control, whether you want a variable to be allow a variable to be redeclared. You can use strict, so you can manage and make your JavaScript behave strictly in terms of the variable declaration and usage as you would do with Java. I'm interested in just the loose form of JavaScript here. Okay, I hope that answers your question, and we'll move on a little bit. Okay. So look, the trick is, you know, you come across some JavaScript, you wonder why it works, what's working, you want to play with it. You know, you could open up browsers now, you can just go to JS Fiddle and start playing like I've just done there. And it's a nice way to exercise into JavaScript. Okay, iteration is really important, of course, in every language. Well, yeah, I suppose it is. Yeah. So we could look at the for loop, for example, and you're welcome, Jonathan. So we could have a look then at JavaScript providing us with many ways to loop. Okay, and I'm sure you've seen these as well in your Java or your Python or your experience. You know, so the for itself, that just loops through a block of code a number of times. And blocks of code, we use chain brackets to create blocks of code. Okay, for in is really interesting. So this is just a for loop, and we have our starting conditions, our terminating conditions, and our iteration conditions, and that you would have which are normal Java, for example. But we have the for in, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, of course, where you iterate over a list. And here we have a list, an interesting one. So we're creating this associative array here: f name John, l name Doe, age 25, a person. And essentially, we're creating this object essentially. And we can loop through the properties of an object if we want. We can look at for of, and we can loop through the values of an iterable as well. So we can do all sorts of fun. So here's a text, here's var. We can iterate over x in person, and we can concatenate whatever we find onto this text, and then we can create a text. So there's lots of fun things we can do. We can use while loop, of course, and while loop, it loops through a block of code while a condition is true. Okay, it's a pre-test, and then we can have a do while. It also loops through with a post-test, so the do loop will always execute the block once, and the while loop may never actually get there. Okay, so you can take these, copy the code, and if you work through some of the examples on the Mozilla JavaScript and Mozilla Developer Network, you can get lots of examples and see all of these things in play. So we can also, we can have a look at JavaScript arrays. So somebody asked the question there, can HTML elements like P be placed into an array? I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could create arrays of HTML elements and then iterate over and display those if you wanted. You can do all sorts of fun things. So yes, but I don't know why. So it's often a good idea to know why you want to do something and then look for the solution. Or you could, another reasonable approach is to look at all the possible things you could do and then find a way to use them. But yeah, you can put it. If the P element is a string, you can put it. And in fact, you can create an array of various elements from the document object model and play with those as well, but that's a bit complex. Quick overview like this. We can always talk about that in lab, or you can mail me if you want to see examples. Okay, an array now is a really special variable, and it can hold more than one value at any one time. And you know this stuff already. I know if you've programmed, you know this. So an array can hold many values under a single name, and you can access the values by referring to an index number inside it, for example. So, for example, I'm interested, for example, let's say we have some classes here. Okay, so let's say we want to create some arrays, and I'm a bit of a gamer for a long time, so I'm interested in using games as examples where I can, you know, just to make it entertaining for myself, of course, as well. So let's say we have an array called base classes. Okay, and these classes are nothing got to do with the classes in Java or JavaScript. They've got to do with the character classes in a game. So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, for example. So we have Barbarian, Bard, Clerics, Druids, all these various classes. And so basically, this is an array of strings. So you can see we're using the square brackets to create the array with brackets with commas in between them. And that's just nice to have this. So Here's another one. Okay, so we have let's have a class called base class. Let's say we've got that as an element in our documents. Then we can actually start updating the contents of those with our contents of the string. So in some respects, it goes with your question there, Terminex, about updating the elements into arrays. So a lot of the time we want to actually do is we can put the values we might want to have to put into HTML elements. We save those in arrays and we update them as we like. Okay, so we could do it. We can play with the base class that we've generated here, this variable, like this. But we can also generate the base class by saying, let's create a new array. So this essentially is equivalent to this. Okay. Then we can do all sorts of fun things, you know, we can reverse and sort the lists, we can do all sorts of nice things, you know, and that's really nice. Okay. So there's fun things. We can use the built-in functions for arrays. So a lot of the time I would never ask you to write a function to sort something. Well, why would I? You know, it's built in already. So you just use those functions already and you need to go and look those things up. Okay. So this is it's nice. So there's fun things you can do. So we can iterate over array if we like. That's fairly straightforward. So we can use the for each. Okay. So that means we can iterate over an array element. So in this case, the array element is called base classes, has all these values here. And then we can list all of those if we want. So we're interested in iterating over these. So what I'm doing here, and this is kind of nice. So what we're interested in doing is we want to create a list of all of these so that we could display a nice drop-down list. Okay, so as that question that came up previously, I keep coming back to this there by, I don't know your real name, but let's say Terminex is there, then you know, you're thinking about, and it's good thinking, you know, you're thinking about how do I connect my array and my data and my content with the structure. And that's really, really important. And this is why at the core of why we have JavaScript. We want to be able to take HTML elements on the display, and then we can actually, we can do this. It's very similar, Misha, in terms of how it works. And you can see some examples here. It might work slightly differently. This is a different one here. It's good, you know, it's good to be able to do this. So we're interested in the for each here. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm actually creating a variable here, create a list using for each on each of these elements, and then as I iterate over the lists, I can add. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a variable called list classes, which is UL. So I'm building this unordered list. I'm starting off with UL, and then what I'm doing is I'm adding each of these to the list, and I'm adding the string. So as I iterate through these, I can just add some tags around each of the elements in the list. And then I can just update the classes and create an element, which is a drop-down list. Okay, and the function I'm calling here toList just basically uses an li, a .li around the values as it iterates over the list. So it's not too complex. So check the example, copy it yourself, play with it, and see how it works. It's a really, really nice way to make that happen. I mean, I'll give you the examples and it will be fine, and I'll give you the code to make this happen, but you should try it yourself as well. It's a good idea to try to do. Okay, so it's important, you know, you can see here that for each of the values in this class, I'm calling this value of toList and adding it to it. So this may not work the exact same way, Misha, as you asked your question as you would with Java. So but it's a nice way to do it. You could, of course, do for each and then specify a variable that's in this list and then work. But it's nice to use this dot notation function, a functional. Okay, something else. So it's generally quick, you can use less memory to create, manipulate JS data and update the relevant parts of DOM, then do it directly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's fast, it's nice to be able to do this, and it's dynamic, and you want to maybe have some some nice dynamic responses, depending on whatever you're trying to do in a particular example. It also means that you may have conditions around what's in the various variables. So you might control what's presented in the list because you might want to hide options in the list at some point or something. So that's useful. So we can also do some, so that's, you know, we've done arrays. I mean, I know we're moving through this pretty quickly, but that's it, it's done. You can look and check and play, of course, as well. Now we've moved on to objects. And objects in JavaScript are really interesting. So you have created, you've already learned, if you've done Java programming at Minute, you have this instruction on creating this world view based on objects and how they interact with each other. Okay? And so you as a programmer, in terms of object-oriented development, will have this world, this view that, you know, everything's an object, and the way they communicate with each other is via methods and control. So, and you look at the ways in which all that can happen in terms of, you know, hierarchical structures and so forth. And you'll see more of that with me when you get to third year again, you know, except I'll be using C# rather than Java, but you know, it's fine. And you can do it with other languages as well, of course. So when you were with Java, you used to see how you could use classes to then instantiate objects, and all those objects have methods and properties, okay? So JavaScript traditionally has been object-based and not object-oriented, and it facilitates the creation of objects. And they basically look like associative arrays. So these are arrays that are accessed using a string rather than a number, and they're sometimes called hashes as well, and you'll see these in other languages. So it's really important. Yeah, I can show an example of how to use the HTML and CSS. Let me see if I can get this done. Let's try this then. Okay, let's try this. So we have this example here. So here's the JavaScript. Let's create all the JavaScript. Copy all the JavaScript. Okay, and let's overwrite all of this stuff. Now let's try and make this a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. Okay, let's have some HTML up here. Now, what did we say we were looking for? So we need an element here called, yeah, something called demo. Okay, so let's do a div. Okay. And this should be the output over here, I guess. Let's make this a little smaller. Okay, I think this is where we run. Let's run and see what. Having difficulty trying to look at the way I've set all this up. I think it's happening. Let's go to JavaScript. All this stuff here. On this, all this. Sorry, I'm not seeing all this easily. I'm sorry. I'm just I'm trying to get to display so I can see. I'm not displaying it properly here. So okay, so let me go back to the. So what's happening here is I've created this object here called Fiat. Sorry, a car, and I'm giving it a default type of Fiat. Its model is 500 and its color is white. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm creating some methods here as well, which allows us to be able to work with this. Then, so I'm executing this, get the car details by getting the element by ID, and I'm just going to look at change the inner HTML to be car.get. See if I can get something working with it. Right there. Run this. Now that's slow, so now I'm not executing this. Okay, so let me make sure this is working okay first. So get this here. see why I'm just, it doesn't like this. Okay, I'll come back to it in a little bit. Okay, I'll do it at the end. Okay, I'll do it at the end because I want to just make progress with it. But this is basically how we make how we will make it work. Okay, so we can actually work with JavaScript objects and classes. So we could consider our objects to be containers that contain many variables, and they could be scalars, objects, functions. But we can actually have JavaScript classes which were introduced in ECMAScript 2015, and they're primarily some syntactical sugar over JavaScript's existing prototype-based inheritance. So, so the class syntax doesn't introduce a new object-oriented interface model to JavaScript. So we could say something like a class rectangle, and we can create a constructor for height and width of this, and this height and this width. We can have getters, which gets the area, setters, which calculate the area, and we can use the class. Okay, so fine, we can do that stuff as well. They're just special functions. And just as you can define a function expressions and function declarations, the class has two components, class and expressions. So we'll, it's useful to be able to have a look. Okay, so somebody's mentioned that there was an error in class 9 on let's have a look and go back, sorry. Line 9, sorry. Oh, yes, thank you, sorry. That's what happens with cutting and pasting. Is there a couple of other ones there as well? Yeah, there's another one there. A couple of extra errors in there as well, but copying and pasting is not good to copy and paste from this, and I don't have time to get through it all there, but we just take this piece out just to at least just address the question somebody asked, and then I can fix the rest of it afterwards. So yeah, there's an error in some of this code that I've copied and pasted, so there must be some string there. But look, just to get to your question, so I created this div ID as demo. The default value is hello. So later on, I can actually run some JavaScript that looks and finds this demo ID div element here and change the internal HTML to hello world from hello. So we start off, when we run, starts off with hello, and then we get hello world. Okay, so there are some errors coming in here from the comma, and I need to fix these before I can get it sorted. I'll come back to that. That should answer the question, and thanks about the error. Okay, deadly. Okay, so we have this. This is nice to be able to have and work with objects and classes as well. And but the point, I suppose, that you need to remember is that the classes are just special functions. It's not like programming in Java. Although, you know, later versions of JavaScript have that class kind of structure. It's a little bit better. So I personally like to use what are called JavaScript objects and prototypes. So for my development, okay, it's a bit like Java or other object-oriented programming. And here's an example from W3 School. So I create this one here. So let's say I have a person. So I would have a function called person with first, last, age, and eye color. So, and then essentially I say that then this dot first name is first, this dot last name is last, this dot age is age, and this dot eye color is eye. Then I can create a variable called my father, for example, which is a new person, John Appleseed 15 blue. I can create my mother, which is a new person, which is Jane Grapefruit, age 48 and green eyes. So this is a nice way to be able to do this. So these are called prototypes, and essentially you can use these functions to be able to generate this. You could also do something with my earlier example where I, for example, had a D&D class which is a function which has a name of the class, an ability, hit points for the die for the hit points, S1 and S2, special abilities. So I can say this, the class name is name, primary stat is ability, the hit die is H die, saving throw A, saving throw B. So these are all functions if you were playing a game around Dungeons and Dragons. And then you could create one for a barbarian, for example, which had all of these kinds of prototypes. And then I could make all this work. It's really nice. to be able to create my variables based around prototype functions. So you could call these classes if you like, but they're actually called prototypes in JavaScript. So it's the way you'll see me develop code a lot like this. What's important, I guess, to recognize is that the objects don't contain single or double quote marks around the keys when no spacing is used in the key name. Spacing in the key name quotes are used. So both definitions here are acceptable. So I would here I've got a person, which is first name John, last name Doe, age 60, and eye color green. And you can see these quotes that are appearing in here. You know, they're not normal quotes, they're you know, enhanced quotes, if you like, and they're not really the quotes we would use in coding that correspond to this one. That's what caused me some errors in the other program book. This is equivalent essentially to this one: first name, last name, age, and eye color, because these are essentially we would need to normally have quotes around the key, okay, if there were spaces in that key. Okay, so that's a useful thing. So they're both acceptable. They're both the same essentially. So they're fine. We'll see lots of examples when we start getting to JSON, which is this JavaScript object notation. The string and the quotes are required usually. Okay, so and we'll see a little bit more when we get to JSON as well. Okay, so ideally pick a scheme, stick with it. If you're unsure initially, then become sure, and maybe just stick with these individual quotes. Okay. JavaScript also provides some nice facilities for creating complex data structures, okay? Really complex data structures as well. So we could combine structures that we saw earlier into a single data structure. So if we looked at our Dungeons and Dragons example, character classes, we could do something like we have on the right here. We could have base classes. One would be Barbarian, one would be Bard, for example. And then we would have all the information for a Barbarian, almost like as a sub-object within this object, base object, Bard. So we can do all sorts of really nice dot notation to be able to actually pull out the various items that we're interested in getting. So, for example, we could say base classes dot barbarian dot primary ability. That would give us base classes dot barbarian dot primary ability, and that would print the value of strength. So that would be really nice. I'll see if I can get this. I'll see if I can get this working. Just to demo it. Overwrite our JavaScript. Okay, so hopefully there won't be any dodgy errors climbing in here from my text paste. So they're fine. And now let's have a look at this here. So instead of writing to the console log, I'll just alert this. Strength. So what we've done here is we've looked at our ignore the HTML. Okay, so we could actually change that if we wanted as well. We might do that. We could we've defined something called base classes, and we have a barbarian and we have a bard. These are the character classes in Dungeons and Dragons. So we're saying base classes dot barbarian dot primary ability. We should get strength. If I change this to hit die, then we would expect to see D12 appearing in the actual alert. Run this, and we get the D12. Now let's go back to our examples that we had earlier. Copy this. And in addition to writing it to the display, I'm going to just write it to here. So instead of the hello, we should get it overwritten with D12. 12. So we can manipulate the contents of the browser, as you asked earlier, of the browser window, by manipulating the various elements, okay? And by having this fancy architectural structure here, which is objects inside objects, or nested objects. Okay, so having used Java, you can see, I suppose, how you would use these kind of dot notations and accessing objects and methods and properties, and it's no different with JavaScript. So as I said, traditionally JavaScript has been object-based, not object-oriented, and it facilitates the creation of all of these objects. So this is what's going on down here. Well, okay, so we're creating all of these objects, and we have objects inside of objects, and we're able to manipulate those. So there's a lot to learn about the language, okay? JavaScript is probably the world's most popular language right now, as I showed you earlier. You can do so much with the language. It's using the client side here, but you can also use all of this stuff from the server side. So what's powerful about JavaScript is that it allows us to use a single language for both the front end, client side, and the back end, server side, and that's referred to as full stack development. So it allows you to code in many different paradigms. So it becomes difficult to follow examples sometimes and so forth, but you have to learn the client side stuff, and then if you use Node.js, the architecture of those programs is very different to the architecture of the front ends for client sides, but you'll get there, and I'll be giving you examples of how to do that. So when you're writing your own code, it's really important that you stick to a single paradigm initially. You'll become familiar with the ways to achieve the same outcome once you become more experienced and you see more code examples. I think what's important really is that you don't have to use object-oriented. You don't have to use functional programming. You use be declarative, and it will be fine. I see a question there from Chris. Will you be giving an overview of Node? We'll be doing extensively working with Node in the latter half of this module. That'll be after the intersemester break. So we'll be doing loads and loads and loads of Node, and you'll see a lot more JavaScript at that point. Okay. Point, I guess, is don't stress about the language hard parts at the moment. Worthwhile investing in truly learning the language. It's really, really, really useful. Okay. We won't be looking at the web assembly as such. No, not specifically. But you can talk to me about it, and we might be able to work in some examples for you. That would be fine. So something from Deirdre, for the assignment, does the JavaScript have to be a separate file? You can do it whatever way you want it. As I said, find a way that works for you, and it's fine. But if it's in a separate file, make sure that you include this in the zip file that you upload for your assignments. Sometimes people just prefer to embed it. The good thing about having files, separate files, is you might want to swap in different files to try different things with that, and retaining your own code. Okay, I have something here that says to do the quiz thing again. So let's go back to the quiz and see. Oh yeah, it's just a little bit of JavaScript, I guess. So let me see what you're welcome, Deirdre. Let me see what the next quiz is. Let me see what that is. Okay, I see there's another quiz here. Yes. Okay, so let's have a look then at this quiz, and maybe you might want to think a little bit. So what will the output be of the JavaScript code? Okay, and I think you could probably see the code somewhere on the screen that I gave you. See the code? You see the code? No? Yeah. Okay, so the string is, so what would the output of this following Java code? So we have a variable called string1, it's the string123, and the value of int value 456, and then what do we get? Good, very good, very good. Very good, so everybody's getting it, that's good. Can you see the code now, F Sinister? No, I mean I've got it over there, no? You should be able to see it on your app as well, okay? Okay. But anyway, okay. So everybody is doing a great job. So it looks good. Those are the correct answer, blue. So you're doing a great job on that. So yeah, that's fine. So well done. Okay, so let me quickly go back here. And just a question or two. I probably should just get to that before I move on to the final part of this lecture. Let me see what the question was from Deirdre. From Emmett. Will the final parameter in the assignment need to be styled as closely as possible on the example? No, it doesn't matter, but you can style those whatever way you want to be able to do those things. But I guess what's important is that the pyramid needs to retain its shape, really, and that's kind of important. Okay, and thanks, Deirdre, for your intervention there. And I'm good, and I'm glad you can see the example there. Okay, so that's good. So we're nearly done. Let me just let me get back to the screen here. Okay, so again, I suppose we come back to this question about how much do I need to know. There's just, look, I mean, this was a very quick tour in an hour, and we did a few more demos than I'd had to do, so we had to rush a little bit. But there's a lot to learn about that language. It's the world's most popular language. You really, you really need to come to grips with this if you want to engage in full stack stuff. Quickly, the last couple of minutes, we can look at event handling, and I'll be talking a little bit about the event handling in the lessons. So you can have JavaScript that makes things happen, or execute JavaScript after events. So you can look at after the page is finished loading, or when an input field is changed, or when you click a button. All of those things are useful, and these are the event handling. And they're going to be, so for example, we generally have something like a button where we click it and we're able to update the contents, okay, of a particular object, for example. So that's really nice to be able to do that kind of stuff, and they're attached to various elements. There are lots of things that you can do, there are lots of event handlers and events that can happen. Something can change, you can click it, you can mouse over it, you can mouse out, you can key down, you can load it. All of these things are possible, and you can attach event handlers to every object that supports these particular kinds of events, and they will all be supported in different kinds of ways. So definitely worthwhile coming to look at these. I'd go to W3 Schools and you'll see some nice examples of all of them. As I said to you, the DOM is really important. This is the document object model. We manipulate that, and the DOM is a W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium standard. It defines a standardization for accessing documents. So it tells us about how we can set up and have HTML elements as objects, the properties of all the elements, the methods, and the events. So the DOM is a standard way to get, change, add, or delete HTML elements. And so working with your JavaScript on the front end necessitates you to be able to become familiar with the DOM as well, and that'll come with practice. And some of the examples I give in the lessons will show you how to do that. So again, as I said, you use JavaScript to access them, and you can do it with other languages as well, of course. But really important is that you can manipulate these. So one of the things that we used earlier was with the document. The document is this object that's created automatically by the browser when you load a page, and then it has a list of all the elements in the DOM, and we're able to find the various elements by searching the DOM, which is a tree, and that's how we were able to find the demo earlier and make changes to it. Okay, so the get element by ID here is a method. Inner HTML is a property. That's you get used to the language and it'll work. And there's a comprehensive list of those on the w3schools.com. You can link through and find them here. But generally, you can change the style of elements. You can change, it's very straightforward, and you can combine all of these as well. So you can actually, you can combine clicks and hovers and change styles and all that kind of stuff. It's easy and straightforward to do once you understand how it's all set up. We can also set up event listeners, and they allowed us to be able to add listeners and handlers when something happens, and we can do all sorts of fun things with that as well. You can generate your own event handlers, and again, I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the lesson. So I'm just flagging it here. We'll come to it in more detail in the lessons, so don't worry too much. Get it? But it's important that we deal with event handling well. And again, there's the browser BOM. So there are no official standards for this. So the browser BOM basically allows us to manipulate the screen and the window and the location and the history and alerts and all that kind of stuff. They're independent of the actual document that's loaded. So when we use alert earlier, we were using one of the browser object model rather than the document. And it's just good to make the distinction between them. That's why I do it. Okay. And you can set up timers and do all sorts of intervals and timers, and we need to do that for playing games, and you'll be a game in your next assignment. So you could have a look at this example a little bit later. I'll give you the code on the slides, and we'll come back to this. But I want you to know that the timers are not part of the document object model, but the browser object model. And we can do all sorts of setups where we can make something happen after we click or after event happens. That's done with time. And of course, there are cookies. So you've all seen cookies, and they're data, small data that's persistent and it's stored in your browser. And it's useful that we can access those. And we see a bit how to do and process those when we look at PHP, for example. We can process them with JavaScript. Okay, quick overview of JavaScript. We had lots to do. We have to get through it pretty quickly. Bit of a blip in the middle there where I had some dodgy text in my code, but we got over it. And then if you're still unclear, you can always contact me. Have a look at the other lessons in a bit more detail. The code will all be there. Most of the code that was on those slides will be in these lessons. That's it for now. As I said, maybe this lecture might not be available on Moodle for a while, but of course it'll be, or the lessons, but you can just check YouTube and you'll get the lectures there. They're already loaded. They should be there tomorrow morning. Okay. They won't be there overnight. It'll be there tomorrow. Thanks again for attending. It was a good turnout, and thanks for the interaction. I appreciate that. It's great to have you here, and good luck with this week's getting the assignment in on time. Okay, thanks again, folks. It's nice to see you.